Well, hello and welcome to Greg Hjorth, Great Talent Wasted on Mathematics. My name's Ian Rogers. I'm here at Melbourne Chess Club to talk about the life and games of Greg Hjorth. For a lot of you here, Greg Hjorth is just a name they've seen in chess books, but he was, in a period in the late 70s, early 80s, one of the very best players in the country. He started playing chess in London, actually. He was one of the products of the Bobby Fischer boom. He in fact started a little bit younger than players like myself, Jared Johansson. He was over there in 70, 71, and Fischer was just on his 20-game winning streak and making the papers, and Greg started to play chess. He wasn't in London very long, but by the time he came back to Australia, he was a very keen player. He started coming along to, well, in fact, he was sort of discovered by Guy West. Guy West went to one of these free school high schools where you didn't have to actually attend classes, and so one day Guy organised a chess match for his school against the primary school where you didn't have to attend classes, which was Press Hill. And Greg Hjorth was board one for Press Hill, and Guy couldn't understand why this little kid was giving him all these problems, and so he came back and reported the next week at Heidelberg Chess Club that there's a really good kid around, and maybe you'll convince him to start coming to Heidelberg Chess Club. Unbeknownst to us, he was already, I think, at St Kilda Chess Club and playing there. But anyway, I think I first really noticed him at Melbourne Chess Club when he beat Emmanuel Basta. Now, only really the older members of the club would remember Basta, but he's a player who, well, he actually grew up in occupied Czechoslovakia playing on the pocket set when he was supposed to be working for the Nazis, digging holes and things as a prisoner. And apparently when the guard disappeared, he'd pull out his pocket set and his friend would play, and Basta came out to Melbourne. He became one of the top players in Victoria. He had a column in, I think it was the Weekly Times, every week for decades. And he was an established, very strong player, and here was a 10-year-old Greg Hjorth toweling him up. And no one could really believe that. Unfortunately, the game wasn't preserved. One of the problems with Australian chess, of course, is that many of the games that you'd like to see have not been preserved. But in any case, Greg started impressing everyone in Melbourne. He started playing not just at Heidelberg and St Kilda, but also at Melbourne Chess Club, also at Waverley Chess Club, and he was very active. I learned today that he was ferried around with Panos Giotis by his dad to Waverley each Friday night, I guess it was. Hard to remember. I used to be ferried to Waverley Chess Club as well by someone called Grant Crocker, who'd take Guy West and myself the long journey out to Glen Waverley, and yeah, it was the chess club run by Robert Jamieson, and or at least he was the star, but it also had other really strong players like Rolf Lundqvist, and it was a real challenge for the kids to play there. Anyway, Greg got a break in 1978 when he was given special permission to play in the Australian Championship in Perth. He was way below the permitted rating. I think his rating was about 1800, and you needed to be 2100 to get into the tournament. But at that time, Melbourne had quite a lot of power on the Australian Chess Federation, and they were convinced that Greg would be okay. And so he played in his first Australian Championship at the age of 14 in Perth. Now, again, for the modern generation, 14 might seem almost old. Carlsen had been a Grandmaster for 1 year by the time he was 14, but back then people learnt their chess at, 10 was young, 12 was normal, and certainly to have a 14-year-old in the Australian Championship was something remarkable. And Greg was very inconsistent. He finished about 50%, just below, but he did win some extremely spectacular games. One of them, Guy West will be showing you tomorrow night against Larry Muser, the American who turned up and played in that tournament. But certainly he also beat established players like Bill Jordan, and he looked like a very serious player. He did, however, have his run-ins with the Arbiter. The Arbiter was a former officer in the British Army, a guy called Russell Looker, and he ran the tournament as you would expect. He appointed an appeals committee which was made up of himself, his wife and his son, and he ruled by decree. And that included, well, only people who understand adjourned games would understand what happened to poor Max Fuller. For example, Max Fuller was playing a game against Bill Jordan. Max Fuller was one of our very top players. Bill Jordan sealed the move, which is what you did when you adjourned a game. You wrote down your next move and put it in an envelope, and on the envelope was a little diagram of the position. And on that diagram, Max Fuller filled out the diagram, but he left one of his rooks off. It was a rook and pawn ending. And Russell Looker insisted that the game be played on with Max without one of his rooks, which really was a disadvantage. They had to go through a series of appeals. He also had a very unique method of pairing the Swiss system, whereby in the second round, number 1 played number 2, number 3 played number 4, number 5 played number 6. So, you know, I think it was Jamison against Woodhams in the second round, and they said this can't be right, but he insisted that he had it all worked out. Anyway, Greg Hjorth was a talkative young lad, and Russell Looker didn't like that. So, at one point, he'd given Greg a warning and for walking around and talking to people during the game, and eventually Greg did it once too often, and so Russell then built a cage around Greg's board of chairs, and as Greg and his opponent were thinking, he just accumulated chairs and built them up higher and higher, so to turn it into a cage match. The opponent didn't really know what was going on. Greg sort of understood that this was his punishment for talking, but ultimately it turned out to be quite a long game, which was a bit unfortunate for the two players, but yeah, they were allowed out afterwards. And yeah, Greg didn't get into trouble that often, but it was interesting. He completely accepted this as a legitimate punishment for talking too much. So Kerry might think of implementing that in some tournaments, perhaps.
Maybe he's used to it at home.
Possibly. So anyway, Greg, it was a good result for Greg. Not a great one, but a very good one. And Greg came back and kept improving. And then the real breakthrough came in Adelaide in the Australian Championship 2 years later, because in that tournament Greg finished second at the age of 16. No 16-year-old had ever achieved anything like that in the Australian Championship. The best performance ever was a 19-year-old John Purdy winning the title, but Greg overcame a lot of established players like Robert Jamison, Terry Shaw, Max Fuller, and the game I want to show you from that tournament was one against a player called Serge Rubenrout. Now, Rubenrout, again, is not really very well known nowadays, but he caused one of the biggest upsets ever, winning the Australian Championship in 1976, and that was one of the strongest fields, and no one could really believe that he was winning it, but he did. He was also not an extremely popular team member. He had a short fuse and did wait outside a chess club one day to beat up an opponent who'd beaten him. And also caused a bit of a scandal at one Olympiad by taking a move back, which isn't done apparently. And the sad bit was his opponent was away from the board but saw it happen and came back and said, you know, you have to move that piece. And Serge said, no, I didn't touch it. And the opponent said, yes, you did, and looked around for witnesses. And the only witness was one of Serge's teammates, Mike Woodhams. And Mike really didn't know what to do, but he sort of said, I didn't see it. And at dinner that night he said to Serge, why do you cheat? And Serge said, what do you mean? And he said, I saw you, move that piece and put it back again. And so unfortunately Serge, and I think Serge did lose that game after all, so justice wasn't entirely done, but well, it wasn't entirely missing from the incident, but yep.
Did Greg get beat up after the game?
No, he didn't.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it only happened once. Yeah. As far as I know. So, Greg is playing, so Greg is white, and...
That's illegal. That's illegal.
And he plays f4, which at that time, 1978 was extremely unusual. Now it's known as the Grand Prix attack, and a whole lot of English players have used it with great success. It actually first started being used in about 75. There was a Grand Prix in England called the Cuddy Sark Grand Prix, which was like our Grand Prix of weekenders put together. And there were one or two players who used it, but it certainly wasn't fashionable at all. And Greg had a habit of picking up these slightly unusual ideas, and a lot of them have subsequently become almost mainstream. I mean, this is not a crazy idea nowadays, but back when Greg played it, it was considered rather weird, and certainly people didn't really know what to do against it. So knight c6, knight f3, and already a very slight inaccuracy by Ruben Rout. He played d6. Really, g6, bishop g7 is a better move order. It means that when white puts his bishop on b5, you can always go knight d4, because after d6, bishop b5, bishop d7 was played again, probably not necessary, but people didn't really understand what white was going for in these positions. So castles, and Ruben Rout didn't play a6, which was also quite common in that era. Take, d3. It turns out white wants to play d3 and not d4 in these lines, and that means the bishop would be locked in. So you want to get rid of that bishop and then play d3. Later on, people decided they could also put the bishop on c4 and get attacking chances that way, but this sort of system is still fairly popular. g6, d7, d3, and now probably almost the decisive error by Ruben Rout, though it was hard to tell at the time. He could just play knight f6, even knight h6 is playable. a6 is also possible, but he went e6, which doesn't look so bad. The knight's going to come to e7, but Greg hit him immediately with f5. And now it's awkward. You can play something like knight e7 if you want, but both bishop f4 and knight g5 are really quite dangerous for black. There's all sorts of problems. With knight g5 there's an f6 move coming, and you pretty well have to grab this pawn. If you grab the pawn around here, there'll be probably a check on the e-file, perhaps with the queen. There'll also be knight g5, but it's probably better than what Ruben Rout played. He took on f5 this way, I think, and after pawn takes he went knight d4. And he's aiming to swap pieces and perhaps castle queenside, but in fact this is already almost a forced win, and from here Greg plays the game nearly perfectly. First of all, bishop g5, which is very accurate. The point is, if knight takes, queen takes bishop, then white will swap the bishops here, and the queen will be already on f3 and will take on b7 and win the rook in the corner. So there's no time to take that bishop on g5 with knight takes knight check. So you can move the queen, but well, yeah, maybe queen c7, though that looks pretty dodgy as well. But perhaps queen c7 is the best try. He played bishop f6, then came bishop takes, knight takes, and now takes, and one more accurate move by Greg, taking on e6. So now, if you just take back with the pawn, you can't take back with the bishop, it's pinned, then knight e4, and that knight is in trouble, and if you swap knights, there's queen here check. So if the pawn takes, then knight e4, and you actually don't have a move here, because if you castle, for example, we just swap everything here and win the bishop down there. So Ruben Rout got a bit desperate. He decided he had to live with the pawn on d7, or at least allow it to get there. He took back, but there's all sorts of problems around here. And Hjorth finished him off quite well. Actually, his next move is extremely accurate and annoying. He just played king h1. it stops queen b6 check, so he keeps the pin down here, and he's ready to go queen f3 or queen h5. Yeah, and also queen check followed by castle's queenside would have got out of the way, but it's not going to happen now. Pawn takes pawn is possible, but okay, the rook will move. Also queen f3 is possible here, and you can't castle, because if you castle, queen g4 check, and the knight is dead. So, in the end, what did he find a way? He played king f8, but it's only hanging on briefly. Knight 5, d4. The knight has to go back to g6, and bishop here. I think he played queen c7, and instead of winning the queen, Greg decided to put the boot in queen d5, and I think he didn't last too much longer. I do think Rembrandt could have resigned around here, but he kept it going for a little while. And finally he gave up. So at that time Rembrandt was rated nearly 200 points ahead of Greg, but he was absolutely demolished. Greg won a number of really good games against some of the strong players. Peter Parr, who was an established New South Wales player, he made draws with Robert Jamison, myself. He really challenged for first place, ultimately finishing second, but it was simply the best result by a 16-year-old. And it was a bit surprising that he didn't get selected for the next Olympiad team, or the one after, in fact. The selectors were very conservative back in those days. Also, Australia would only send 5 players instead of the 6 that were allowed, and they consistently were selecting established players like Max Fuller, Terry Shaw, and probably Greg. Well, in 1982, for example, Greg Hjorth came as the number 6 player in Lucerne, but he didn't actually get to play a game. He came just to get experience. So the same thing had happened to Guy West in 1980 at the Malta Olympiad. Greg was in fact extremely useful as a team analyst in 1982. There was one key rook ending that Daryl Johansson adjourned in a very bad position, where he thought he's just going to lose, and Greg said, no, you're going to win. And Daryl didn't really believe him, but Greg showed a series of really nasty ideas. Well, I can actually show you this one. It's quite an extraordinary endgame. Okay, we're playing against Romania in Lucerne in 1982. Now, this was Australia's best ever Olympiad. In 1982, okay, this is the second last round. We're actually 2-1 down in the match. In this Olympiad, we'd already drawn with Germany, Cuba, Israel. We'd beaten Argentina, Norway, Canada, Brazil, Poland. We'd really had a fantastic Olympiad. Unfortunately, in the last round, we lost 3.5 to Bulgaria, which dropped us down to 22nd place. We'd spent the whole Olympiad around about place number 10 or thereabouts. But yeah, it was, Greg wasn't actually playing, but he was sort of an integral part of us doing rather well in that Olympiad. That was the Olympiad where Robert Jamison got Australia's first Grandmaster result. And so in the match against Romania, Jamison had made a very easy draw with Florin Gheorghiu, he was a world-class player back then, but Daryl was soon in trouble, and let's get to the, I'll get to the position around about the adjournment, which was about with 47. So this endgame, at first sight, it doesn't look so terrible for Daryl, but it's actually his king that's really cut out of the game. Let's see, I need another rook. And a pawn here. So the problem here for Darryl is that Black's king is just going here to here to here and helping the pawn through. And you can take a few pawns over here if you want, but ultimately you're going to lose a rook over on this side. And yeah, well, Darryl during the game wondered if this position was resignable, but Greg kept his spirits up anyway. I think did he repeat once? No, he played rook here, sorry, to stop the king coming in. Rook here, check, and now the king walks in. So king up. You can grab this pawn, but this is very fast. So instead he tried to bring this rook around to defend from the back. So he stopped it with rook b6 here. So at least he's managing to stop the pawn advancing in the short term. And now Darryl starts playing the idea that Greg had come up with, and it starts with rook takes here. At first sight that doesn't seem to do much because, it seems easy to play because pawn up, rook across here, and the pawn is captured. But it's very easy now for Black to just lock that rook out of the game. That rook is not coming back. So for example, if rook here, we put one rook there and one rook here, and then the pawn is going to go through. So there's no way to stop that. But instead, Darryl played rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and now not h3, which is the move Darryl had thought, but it's way too slow. It was instead f3. So he's trying to take and hopefully push those pawns as fast as he can. If pawn takes, king takes, then the white king's a little bit closer, so Black's unlikely to do that. Although it turns out he should take king takes and play pawn up, after which there's a threat of check and rook here. So white's king should keep moving up, and that turns out to be a draw with best play. But instead, Ginder thought he was just winning. So pawn up, pawn takes pawn, queen, rook takes, king takes. And it's true, the white pawns aren't super fast here. But whereas Darryl had wanted to just push pawns, and it turns out this king comes back fast enough and the rook will stop whichever pawn is pushing. Greg realised that the most important thing here was actually to activate the white king. Now whenever e5 happens, the king can come to f5, so Black comes back here, pawn up, king comes back, pawn up, just in time, because if you play rook here to take this guy, pawn up, and that pawn is going to queen. So even though it's only one pawn advancing, it makes all the difference. And again, white can't play his king up here, because after king takes, this pawn will be a winner, but he can back up the pawn with another one. So here, check is played, king up, check, king here. Sorry, he didn't go there, he went to g5, sorry. King takes pawn, and pawn up. And here Ginder realised that everything was a bit slow. So if he moves his king out of the way and tries to push this, white pushes, pushes again, gains a tempo on the rook, king up, and he will queen first. So Ginder tried rook check, but after king here, he realised there's no stopping those pawns, and he resigned. So Australia drew that match 2-2, mainly thanks to Greg's optimism, as well as analysis. because he simply refused to accept that Darryl was going to lose. Greg, in fact, was the premier rook-ending player in Australia, and the main reason was that when he was about 13, he sat down and read Smyslov and Levenfish's book, Rook Endings, cover to cover. And that's a pretty tough thing to do. I've read a few pages of it, I guess. But it's not really entertaining. But anyway, Greg managed to put that into action quite early in 1982. Also, he played the zonal tournament in Hong Kong, and he got a losing rook endgame against the top seed, Eugene Torre, early in the tournament. Somehow, Torre swapped off pieces to get a position where Greg's king was completely cut off, something like this, and cut off by 2 files. But in fact, Greg knew that this was a technical draw. He starts checking, and basically, if the king walks too far forward, you just go back and attack this pawn. And after king here, rook here, white can manoeuvre, but basically can't improve the position enough. The black king needs to hang around here to stop white playing rook e3 and defending the pawn and then charging the king up the board. But Torre didn't know that, and it was a really interesting post-mortem after that game where Torre was saying it has to be winning, and Greg saying book draw. And Greg was, of course, right, and by the end of the post-mortem, certainly Torre had accepted that. So in 1982, before the Lucerne Olympiad, Greg had his first taste of playing internationally. He played in Hungary alongside Darryl Johansson in a tournament in Kecskemét. This was really quite brave back then. For those of you who don't realise, Hungary was behind the Iron Curtain. It was a communist country, very difficult for an Australian to get a visa, and everything about it was officials with submachine guns and really hard to get around. And remembering Greg was really only 18, 19 then, but the two of them agreed to play this open tournament in Kecskemét. They shared a room. In fact, it was a room in someone's house. In those days, the tournaments, the organisers would convince locals to give up most of their house to the chess players, and so apparently the couple who lived there were sleeping in the kitchen, and the rest of the house was for Darryl and Greg, which was a bit strange. But okay, the flats were rather small, so it was not a lot of rooms for them.